Hello, everybody. So today I want to take a little bit of time to explain currencies as parachutes. I know currencies are not parachutes, but talking about currencies, talking about highly illogical concepts like exponentially leaking fiat currencies, it's complicated if you don't use analogies. And I try to use analogies or metaphors to describe currencies, right? This channel is named Beat the Denominator. It's all about making sure that one's investments outpace the devaluation of the money and the devaluation of the fiat currencies around the world. Currencies that are leaking, right? Just about everywhere. And so a prior metaphor that I've used on this channel was the whole pouring water into wine. Don't put water into my wine was a video I made a few months ago. And it's the whole idea that, this is the US dollar and they keep adding US dollars. And since they keep adding US dollars, they dilute your dollar. Just like someone, if they were to add water to your wine, you wouldn't be happy. The wine would get worse as more water gets added, right? It's the same that's happening with monetary printing and currencies being subject to ever more printing. And so this is where the other metaphor of a parachute comes up, right? So we know over time that currencies are going to zero. This is the chairman, vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, right? Charlie Munger famously said 2 years ago, he said, 100 years from now, fiat currency is going to zero. We've known this. Always known this. Governments have no issues publishing this. Governments fully know and expect inflation to be built in the currency. And if you look at the currency purchasing power, for example, of the dollar, you can see that we're at a few pennies compared to what it was, 105 or 110 years ago. We are just at a few pennies of a purchasing value of a dollar. 100 in the 1910s, right? So the dollar has greatly reduced in value. And another example that I often use to talk about the dollar is I like to look at old Sears catalogs. You can find them online in PDFs. This is an example of an old Sears catalog in the US of 1908. And so I typically show different homes in my videos, but this is another one. This is a Victorian style home, right? A really nice Victorian style house with I think they have about 8 rooms in it. Anyways, the house is $753, and if you wanted to, and that's all of the labor, all of the components, right? And if you wanted to actually build that house, you'd have to add another $1,500 to pay for all of the labor. So that doesn't change the share of labor in a house, but essentially that house you could have had for $2,300 roughly, right? Is what would have been the cost of that house in 1908, fully built, fully everything. And actually the devaluation of the money is even more telling when you look at things like the add-ons, like warm air heating, central air for the whole house. Well, that was a $78.05 option back then to add a whole home heating. Of course, today that'd be at least 20 grand, right? So you can clearly see the devaluation of a dollar when you look at actually the actual cost of a house, say brand new house in 1908. So we know that's going to happen. And by the way, the US is lucky. The US is lucky that the currency even survived, because in most situations, in most countries, the currency doesn't survive, or at least not in an old state. Most don't survive. They get reset. So for example, I'm French originally. In France, we went from ancien franc to nouveau franc, which was a 100-to-1 revaluation of the money. So they did 100-to-1 in 1960, and then we went from nouveau franc to the euro. So they did another. Well, the euro was a different conversion, but they've changed currency twice in 60 years. And each time when you talk to people, they'll tell you about how much cheaper it used to be, how much cheaper life used to be. In Germany, that was even worse, right? With the Weimar Republic. In the Weimar Republic, the currency got devalued so much that you had people using money to make outfits, like a dress. Money as a wallpaper, actually, when I read about it, was a common thing for people to use money as wallpaper, right? Money as toys for kids. You had to have wheelbarrow to move money around. It was clogging the streets. This book talks about that very, very well. So eventually, currencies go to zero because you can't put a stop at the ever increasing pile of debt. Debt doesn't ever get reduced, right? Debt is only paid off with new debt that gets issued, and that is just the nature of currencies. There's no issues with that. We've always known that. Everybody knows that. But why is it important to understand currencies as parachutes for a stock investor? Well, this is an example of the way you could view the world. So you have currencies that are doing better at devaluation than others for the longest time. And keep in mind, you need to have a long view on this, right? The euro is a very recent currency. The euro, as much as I like the euro, it's a very recent currency. You can't make the stretch that the euro is nearly as strong as the dollar in any way, in my view. In my view, when I look at the main currencies of the world, the US dollar is still the main currency. Even though they have a lot of debt and they have a lot of issues, they're still the world reserve asset, and still you have, many companies, you still have some management, and you have fiscal tightening, and you have interest tightening. You still have a lot of things going on for the US, which means that even though I'll be the first to agree that the currency, the dollar, as evidenced by official data and historic data, yes, the dollar is going to zero as well. But the question is, who's gonna get to zero? This is landing, right? The landing is zero. That's the destination. You're jumping with a parachute. Who's gonna be the first one to reach zero? That is the question. And so the euro and the British pound, I would say, are about equal in my view. The Swiss franc is a little better. The USD is on top there in my view, due to its world reserve currency. And then you have examples like the Venezuelan bolivar, where they've essentially landed and the currency has essentially become worthless. And why do we care about currencies? Because stocks operate within currencies. Stocks are derivatives of currencies. So when you buy, for example, a stock that denominates its sales and its earnings in dollars, you are buying a stock that belongs in the dollar universe, right? That is traded in dollars, traded on margin in dollar. If you buy a company like Nestle, that's the Swiss franc universe. AstraZeneca, that's the British pound universe, right? Companies like ASML or SAP or LVMH, that's the euro universe. And so whenever you make an investment decision, it is also inevitable that you're buying a currency derivative that may be or may not be close to zero just yet, but that is inevitably going to zero. As we know, this is the direction of currencies. And when you decide which stock to buy, in my view, the way I look at it is that you have to look at your day-to-day living. Which currency are you using in your day-to-day living? And is it worth an upgrade? Is it worth getting away from the ground, right? Is it worth moving back up from the ground? So clearly, if you had Venezuelan bolivar, buying any stock here would make a lot of sense, because you want to get exposure to these more stable currencies. But I would argue, and I know a lot of the investors on the channel are either in the UK or in Europe, I would argue that it's a positive swap, right? It's a positive thing when you buy a stock in the USA and living in Europe. It is a very highly positive thing, in my view, in the long run, because if you look at the trends of currency in the long run, when a stock is quoted in US dollar, it's going to retain its value much more relative to stocks that may be, traded in local currency that is losing its value. If you happen to be in a nation that has local currency that is not as well managed as the US dollar, and it makes, I feel so weird saying that the US dollar is better managed than a lot of currencies. I feel very weird saying that, because clearly a lot of videos I've done on the channel, my macro videos, is talking about how it's not a well-managed currency, right? And this is where the conversation about Bitcoin and about digital money would come in. This is also the time a conversation about gold could also potentially come in, where you want to have currencies or money actually, and not currencies, right? Where you want to have something that is closer to the true value of money. So just know that when you buy a stock, you are taking currency risk whether you want it or not. And I didn't put the Brazilian real in this video, but obviously when I buy for this channel, when I talk about my new bank or my Stone co-investment, I am well aware that I am buying in a currency whose parachute is probably around here, right? That would be the Brazilian real would probably be around at this level, roughly, right? That would be the level of the real. So I just know what's happening when I buy a stock, and I need to make sure that I pick the right parachute. So perhaps if your parachute is falling faster than you wish, perhaps it makes sense to get a hedge by investing in a company that is on board of a parachute that is falling more slowly. And that is the conclusion of this very simple video. Thank you so much for watching. This is not investment advice. This is just entertainment. Appreciate your likes and subscribes. Have a great day.